The room fell silent the moment he stepped in, like a ripple of disbelief spreading across polished marble floors and glass walls that reflected nothing but wealth. Heads turned, not in admiration, but in quiet judgment. A single father in worn shoes, holding the small hand of his daughter, had just walked into a place where people believed he didn't belong. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. Stories like this remind us that appearances don't define worth. Arman Vale didn't flinch, though he felt every stare like a weight pressing against his chest. His daughter, Mira, clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly, her small fingers curled into the soft fabric as if it were armor. The luxury car auction hall gleamed under the midday sun pouring through massive skylights, illuminating rows of pristine machines that looked more like art than vehicles. Chrome shone, engines whispered promises of power, and the air smelled faintly of leather and money. Arman had spent years in places where no one noticed him, construction sites, night shifts at warehouses, dimly lit garages where grease stained his hands and exhaustion settled into his bones. He wasn't meant for this world of tailored suits and practiced smiles. But today wasn't about fitting in. Today was about something far bigger. Mira looked up at him with wide, questioning eyes, sensing the tension but trusting him completely. That trust was what kept him steady. He squeezed her hand gently, grounding himself in the one thing that mattered most. The murmurs began almost immediately. A man in a sharp gray suit smirked openly, nudging the woman beside him. A group near the front exchanged amused glances, their laughter barely disguised. Someone whispered something that made another chuckle under their breath. The message was clear: he was out of place. Arman had heard worse. He had lived through worse. Years ago, life had been different. He had dreams then, small, quiet dreams of stability, of a home filled with warmth, of a future where he could provide without constantly counting every dollar. But life had unraveled faster than he could hold it together. His wife had left when Mira was just a baby, chasing a life that didn't include sleepless nights or financial struggle. Arman had been left with a crying infant and a mountain of responsibilities he never expected to carry alone. There were nights he didn't think he would make it. Nights when the fridge was nearly empty, when Mira's soft cries echoed in the darkness, when exhaustion blurred his vision and doubt whispered that he wasn't enough. But every morning, he got up anyway. He learned. He adapted. He fought. He took every job he could find. He worked through injuries, through illness, through heartbreak. And somewhere along the way, he discovered something unexpected: he had a gift for understanding engines. Not just fixing them, but seeing possibilities others overlooked. He began restoring old cars, bringing forgotten machines back to life in a cramped garage he could barely afford. It started small. A rusted sedan here, a neglected coupe there. But his work was different. He didn't just repair cars, he revived them. Word spread quietly. People began to notice. Collectors came, cautiously at first, then with growing interest. But Arman never chased recognition. He chased survival. He chased a better life for Mira. The auctioneer's voice cut through the room, crisp and commanding, pulling Arman back to the present. The event had begun. One by one, luxury cars rolled onto the stage, each greeted with applause and eager bids. Numbers soared effortlessly, rising into ranges Arman had only ever seen in headlines. Mira watched with fascination, her earlier unease slowly replaced by curiosity. The cars gleamed like something out of a dream, their polished surfaces reflecting her small, awestruck face. Arman, however, wasn't watching every car. He was waiting. Near the end of the lineup, it appeared. A deep green classic, sleek, powerful, timeless. The kind of car that carried history in its curves, that whispered stories of speed, ambition, and legacy. It rolled onto the stage like royalty, and the room shifted instantly. Conversations hushed. Eyes sharpened. This was the one. Arman's breath caught, just for a moment. He knew that car. Not just the model. Not just the craftsmanship. That exact car. Years ago, before everything had fallen apart, before life had demanded more than he thought he could give, he had worked on it. It had belonged to an older collector who had seen something in Arman, a spark, perhaps, or simply a willingness to care about details others ignored. Arman had poured everything into restoring it back then, long nights spent perfecting every inch, learning, growing. That car had been his turning point. And now it was here. The bidding started high. Predictably high. Numbers climbed quickly as wealthy collectors competed with effortless confidence. The man in the gray suit led early, his voice smooth, his posture relaxed, as though victory was already his. Arman stayed silent. He felt the weight of his decision pressing in. Everything he had built, everything he had saved, every sacrifice, it all led to this moment. It wasn't just about the car. It was about proving something, not to them, but to himself. To Mira. The bids climbed higher. The room buzzed with excitement, tension building with each new number. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell like a conductor guiding an orchestra, drawing out the drama. Mira tugged gently on Arman's sleeve, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. She didn't need to ask. She simply looked at him, her eyes filled with quiet faith. And that was enough. Arman raised his hand. At first, no one noticed. It was subtle, almost hesitant. But the auctioneer caught it, his practiced eyes sharp. A new bid was announced. The room turned. Confusion flickered across faces, quickly replaced by disbelief. The man in the gray suit laughed openly now, shaking his head as though it were a joke. Others joined in, their amusement barely contained. Arman stood still, his expression calm, his hand steady. The bidding continued. The gray-suited man countered immediately, his confidence unshaken. But Arman didn't back down. Each time the number rose, he followed. The laughter began to fade. Something had changed. What started as entertainment had turned into curiosity, then into tension. The room could no longer ignore him. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. He was serious. The numbers climbed into a range that made even seasoned collectors hesitate. The gray-suited man's smile faltered, just slightly. He glanced at Arman more carefully now, trying to understand what he had dismissed too quickly. But Arman offered no explanation, no reaction. Just quiet determination. Another bid. Then another. The room held its breath. And then, Arman made his move. He raised his hand once more, his voice firm, clear, and unwavering as he placed a bid that shattered expectations. It was higher than anyone anticipated. Higher than what most believed the car was worth. Higher than what logic would suggest. Silence fell completely. No whispers. No laughter. Just stunned disbelief. The gray-suited man hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. He calculated quickly, weighing pride against reason. But something in Arman's gaze made him pause. This wasn't about wealth. It was about something deeper, something he couldn't compete with. The auctioneer repeated the bid, his voice echoing through the hall. Once. Twice. A long moment stretched, heavy with anticipation. And then. Sold. The gavel struck. The sound reverberated through the room like a final note in a symphony. Arman exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his body all at once. Mira looked up at him, her face lighting up with pure joy, not fully understanding the magnitude of what had just happened, but knowing it mattered. The room remained quiet, but the energy had shifted completely. The same people who had mocked him now watched in silence, their earlier confidence replaced with something closer to respect, or perhaps confusion. As Arman walked forward, Mira's hand still in his, he didn't look at them. He didn't need to. This moment wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving himself right. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, a few approached him cautiously. Questions lingered in their eyes, curiosity replacing judgment. But Arman didn't linger long. He had no interest in explaining his story to people who had already decided who he was. Outside, the sunlight felt warmer. Mira hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around him with all the strength she had. He knelt down, meeting her at eye level, and for a moment, the world faded away. All the struggle, all the doubt, all the nights of uncertainty, they had led here. Not to a car, but to a moment of quiet victory. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your support helps stories like this reach more people who need a reminder that strength often comes from the most unexpected places. And before we end, here's a special request. Comment, "I believe in quiet strength," if you've ever had to prove your worth without saying a word. Arman didn't drive away that day as a man who had something to prove. He drove away as someone who had already proven it, to himself, to his daughter, and to a world that had underestimated him for far too long. Because sometimes, the loudest victories are the ones spoken in silence.